Hello, I'm assuming you've just watched the trailer for the new game called Ill that's coming out, and I'm sure that the first thing going through your mind is probably, what the hell? And I am here to tell you what the hell exactly is. This is going to be a breakdown of the trailer itself, as well as footage that I think you may not have seen unless you've done some real scrolling back on Instagram, because I actually have footage of one of the mini-bosses in early development, and other bits and bobs that are going to tell us everything we need to know about Ill. So let's get started with all the gory details I found, shall we? The first thing that we know about the game that's pretty obvious is that the bodies are animated by parasites. You saw them very briefly just there, so allow me to scrub back and just make sure that's engraved into your memory. They were here, these little things crawling around, obviously the parasites that are infecting these bodies, so then not undead, they're more like virus-infected people. A big thing we also know about the enemies is that Dismemberment is a large part of how we're going to be fighting them. You can see the enemies kind of dismember themselves as well. In that clip just there, this bit here, you can see that they are recontorting all of their bodies. So there are certain ways that our bones are supposed to move, and I'm almost certain that this isn't it. So if you look at this arm here, you can see it breaking here and then kind of reattaching itself. And I mean, look at this. Your body's not supposed to move like that. So it's safe to assume that the parasites within these bodies are recontorting them and reconstituting these bodies to kind of get into all the little nooks and crannies, so we're never safe. Love that. Something the devs have revealed is that when you shoot off a limb from the enemy, it can be born into another enemy type. So you'll have disembodied hands and arms walking around, or like dragging themselves around, trying to kill you. This is really similar to the Divider enemy in Dead Space 2, where it was kind of made out of multiple different bits of necromorphs, but when you shot it, each different bit would turn into its own creature. There is something back here that I want to draw your attention to as well. This giant mass of enemies right here is really reminding me of the Rat King in The Last of Us, but what this also shows is that the enemies we're facing aren't necessarily going to be individual zombies, for lack of a better word. Whatever this parasite has done, it has twisted humans and other creatures, as I'm going to show you in just a bit, into these kind of like forms of just flesh and terror that we're going to fight. So I'd assume that something like this is probably going to be like a barrier to our progression, and I don't mean that in a metaphorical sense. In a literal sense, it's probably going to block off a space that we can't get through. But I mean, look at this thing. It's absolutely huge. And gross. Something the developers are keen to emphasize is that the monsters in Ill are unpredictable. They react to their surroundings on impulse and exhibit disturbingly human-like reflexes. So what that means in terms of real gameplay is that you can maim and dismember and shred the flesh of these creatures. The dismemberment system is something that they're pushing very heavily, so I think we can expect something similar to Dead Space, where you would have layers of skin that could be shot or lasered off of necromorphs, which was gross, but it's a very cool way to sell the dismemberment system and show it in action. Now, an interesting thing about these enemies is that they can use tools, which definitely means in my mind they're not really zombies, because I don't associate zombies with using tools, but we're going to have to keep on our toes, and maybe their toes as well if they split off, because these are intelligent creatures, semi-intelligent, and also they come in all different sizes, which is terrifying. Like I said with the Rat King before, I'm going to assume that the parasite that's controlling all these bodies has found a way to make things much bigger, possibly by like absorbing other bits of flesh, but I love that sense of unpredictability we're going to have, where we don't know whether we're coming across a normal zombie or one that's like 8 foot tall like this, or just a giant head. Never had any complaints. In other interviews, the developers have said that this dynamic enemy behaviour will mainly consist of how enemies react to player actions. You can see that in action very well just about here, where we see this creature throwing a box at us. So the enemies are going to be trying to disarm us, and they are going to use a kind of human intelligence to protect themselves and try to make sure that we don't hurt them too badly. Now, if I play this in super slow motion, you can see that after we shoot this enemy for the second time and actually hit it, we can see that it looks at its arm to see it's been shot off. That's not particularly zombie behaviour, because there's not a connection between knowing that that is a part of you and it's been shot off. They're more just shambling blocks of flesh. But the fact that this creature has this reaction shows that these creatures are going to be understanding that we are dismantling and dismembering them, which I just thought is an interesting thing to be aware of. This is a recording I took from Instagram. It is from a couple of years ago, so there's no guarantee this is going to appear in the final game itself, but this is a good example of how the creatures are going to be reacting to you as the player. Now, when you stumble upon them here, they are doing something that we're going to get a closer look at in just a second, but they also follow you. One's about to come out of the door in a couple of seconds that is going to pick up something to chuck at you, so they're definitely going to have some kind of group mentality where they recognize you as the outsider. And just now, coming around the corner, we're going to be able to see that there was a dead body they were doing things with. It looks like they were tearing it apart, maybe putting it into a bucket that's nearby. Instagram has thankfully censored out the dead body, otherwise that would be instant demonetization. But whatever it is, the creatures animated by the parasite do appear to have some kind of ulterior motive. They were doing something to this body. So I think in terms of the story of Ill, there's going to be more going on than we would necessarily expect. There is going to be some kind of hive mind perhaps we're going to come up against at the end of the game, but I think this is just really unnerving and uncanny in the best kind of way. There's nothing like realizing the creature you're going to be fighting against isn't mindless. There is some kind of intelligence behind those eyes, even though they are bloated or obscured by flesh. But those enemies aren't the only thing we're going to be facing. Right here you can see a military outfit of some kind who is clearly trying to clean up any signs of what broke out here. Now, although originally I did think this might be an ally, the way that the gun switches to then like immediately face you after they've killed that zombie makes me think that this is going to be another enemy faction that we're going to have to be dealing with. I do not think are in that enemy faction, because otherwise we'd have better stuff to work with than a wrench, but this to me screams government cover-up, and we are going to try to not be one of the things that are covered up by dirt, because we'll be dead. In this early gameplay slice released, you can see that it's not just humans we're going to be coming up against in terms of the parasite. That is not human, and although it might be mutated, we actually get a much closer glimpse in just a second or two of the other creatures, right here. Now, let me go back and just play that way slower. So playing this in slow motion, you can see that this is the typical enemy we're used to coming out in front of us. But right here, the thing that's chasing us is not a human at all. It looks like it's a sheep that's been infected with this parasite. Look at those ears. Hang on a second, let me see if I can get a clear frame. Sorry, this is the clearest frame I can get of it, but you can clearly see here that this is a sheep. There's this kind of woolly mass on top, this is the snout right here, and these are the ears. So I think this implies that whatever was going on in this research facility, they were using sheep as experimental subjects, and we're going to be coming up across them later, because whatever they were infected with turned them into this huge, bloody, spider-like mass. While the original plan was to have Ill take place in a small American town, it has been moved to what's being called a research fort now. I think it's fairly obvious from the trailer that we're also going to be fighting against maybe like a mercenary group who's trying to control whatever went on here, but this is the research fort itself. I personally think, having played too much Reveal the Deep, that they're gonna have discovered the parasite when they were digging far too deep, just like dwarves. But relating to that, what's far more interesting is what flashes up later on in the trailer. Namely, this house. What the hell is a house doing in a research fort? Could it be that the research fort was built around this house because this is wherever the parasite thing started to appear? I personally think that's most likely. The fact that this house is surrounded by not only loads of walkways to get different angles and views on it, but cameras, makes me think that this is where the parasite started. The house itself is in fairly good nick, considering it doesn't look like it's been ripped apart, but later on in the trailer we do actually get a glimpse inside the house. So in this bit right here, for a couple of seconds, you see this creature making its way through the house. This is the only time that we see that kind of domestic interior in this trailer, and it looks like old-fashioned, and these also look like floodlights coming through the window. So I think this is the same house that we saw just a couple of seconds ago. What's cool about it is that you can see all these family photos on the wall, and the inside looks fairly pristine, considering it might be where this parasitic thing started. So whatever it was, they used to have it under control, or maybe it mutated to the point where it turns into something like this and destroys everything. Destructible environments are also a really big part of ill. I'll go on to talk about that later. But this creature is, I don't think, made up of just one body, so I kind of think that it might be a family that was all infected by the parasite, and then, similar to the Rat King in The Last of Us 2, it became one giant glob of just trauma. This bit here you can find on Ill's YouTube channel and shows the underground of the fort itself. This is much more recent, so I think it's a good indication of what the game is going to look like, but you can see just how retro the game itself is. So I'm assuming it's maybe set in the 80s or 90s potentially, because the torch that the player character is holding just before this certainly looks like it's from this era, but the lighting of this game is so creepy. The way that the darkness just kind of comes upon you, like out of the distance there, and also the lighting from way earlier. This bit here is so cold from the fluorescent stuff. I think this really does give the idea that you're underneath some kind of research station, and this is going to be one of those tight corridor areas that the developers are very proud of, and I'm sure are going to absolutely freak us out. I do apologise for the recording quality here. I could only find this footage on Instagram and couldn't extract it from there, so this is a lovely screen recording you're getting. This looks like one of the original kind of tests for ill, where it was going to be set in a small American town, because this looks very rural and doesn't look like the snowy landscape that we see in the trailer. Interestingly, these zombies that we're going to come to face with very shortly, they tend to have a different design where their faces are more bloated from decomposition than they are kind of like made in something entirely different, as we can see in the trailer with their lidless eyes and stuff. So this is a much earlier direction of ill, but I think it still communicates that the enemies we're facing are intelligent enough to cause a car crash and then pull you out of it and not immediately eat you. And also, this one here is going to stomp on our player character when we try to say, like, what's going on? So that's a very early glimpse of the game itself. This footage is from years ago, so there's no reason to assume that this would be in the final game, but I think it's a good indication of the direction that ill is going to take, in terms of the atmosphere especially. And this right here is where this video gets demonetized. This is early footage for a mini-boss in ill, again from multiple years ago, so there's no reason to assume that the enemies will be like this, but again, I do think it's a good indication about the kind of thinking that was going on around ill in the developers' minds. Again, here you can clearly see this is a parasite of some kind that is transforming dead bodies. Unfortunately, because I had unrestricted access to the internet at a young age, I do know that that is what a dead body's face can look like. So the inspiration for ill from way back then appears to have been much more realistic, whereas they've gone for more of a mutated look now, which I think is a good thing. The bloated faces do look absolutely horrendous, but they can look quite samey, whereas with more mutated faces you can kind of add a bit more variation there. This footage here is from a couple of years ago, but I think it gives you a pretty good idea of the parasite itself and the fact that it will be animating these dead bodies. A moment of silence for the demonetization that this video is going to get, because that just got shown. From interviews with the developers, we do know what the actual gameplay itself is going to be like. So according to them, stages are being divided into larger, more open areas, which then split off into tighter corridor sections, which you do see in this trailer. This is one of those sections, I think. It looks like a kind of narrow corridor, and there's plenty of bits in the trailer where it's implied that you're going to be kind of in close quarters with the things that are trying to kill you. So developers have also said that there are alternate paths and you're encouraged to look around to find things, but it's definitely not freeform. In terms of the looking around to find things, resource management is a fair amount of the game, but the developers have said it's not the boring kind of research management, and yes, they use that exact term. Some crafting does come into it as well, which I will get onto in just a bit, but I think broadly we can kind of equate the gameplay of Ill with something maybe like Resident Evil, just with less inventory management. This is some of the gameplay that was revealed by the developers of Ill, and shows one of the things that I haven't mentioned here about the game, which is that solving puzzles is going to be key to our survival. There's a very small puzzle here, I don't know if I'd even call it a puzzle, but our player character is going to find some bolt cutters to open a lock. Now, the developers have gone into more detail about exactly what we can expect from Ill in regards to the story. They've said it's a story-driven game with lots of cutscenes and different characters, but the tone of the game is going to switch between action and what they described as classic horror, with a PT-like atmosphere. Now, I assume that means quite tight corridors with a lot of tension, and then in other parts of it they've said that you'll meet an enemy and you shoot and we push that area to the maximum as well. So it's going to be a mix of action horror and the more tense horror that I personally prefer. See here, you can see picking up the wrench, I think that is, and smashing the lock. Again, wouldn't really describe this as a puzzle, but it does indicate that we're going to have to use items from our surroundings to progress throughout the game. It is linear, but again, as I said earlier, there is exploration that is encouraged. Now to talk about the most exciting thing about any game, resource management. As I said way earlier in the video, the developers are keen to emphasize that it's not the boring type. They said, word for word, it's just collecting some stuff to upgrade your weapons and stats, so they describe it as strategic inventory management. There is crafting as well. You'll have to do things like check your weapons for defects, modify and upgrade them, and they also say that your ability to create an item could determine the outcome of the battle, which I do kind of think is just a vague phrase that you could apply to a lot of different games. Like, your ability to create any kind of item can determine outcomes of battles in many different kinds of ways, but it's cool to see that you are going to kind of have to assess and modify your weapons for them to perform best, because it makes sense that if you're exploring an abandoned research fort, the weapons you're going to find are going to be older and probably broken because they've been exposed to the elements for God knows how long. In terms of what we know about the people behind Team Clout, they do have experience working on horror movies. So on the website they list that they've worked on series like Longlegs, Until Dawn, VHS Beyond, It, Welcome to Derry, Azrael and more. I actually did some digging into the developers themselves, and it looks like most of the experience comes from someone called Maxim Verehin, who's worked in terms of concept art on projects like Israel. He actually did concept art of Nicolas Cage's character in Longlegs, which is really cool, and Path of Exile 2 and Outriders. I couldn't find which member of staff worked on VHS Beyond or It or Until Dawn, but I'm going to assume it's Maxim because he has quite a rich history of doing horror-based concept art for media properties, which is cool. And also I think it shows that the game itself is in good hands, because in particular Nicolas Cage in Longlegs, the way he looked was so unnerving. It really spoke to a new perspective about what horror can be like, so I'm excited to see what his work is going to be like in Ill. Those are all the gory details about Ill that I know right this second. If you're interested, I suggest going to the Instagram account that I showed earlier in the video. There's a lot of work in progress on there of the game itself. Most of it isn't particularly relevant because it came out years ago, but with the bits I showed, I think you can see that there's a clear indication of the direction the game is going. If you enjoyed this video or were grossed out by it, please do like it, and don't forget to subscribe to Eurogamer as well for more videos about video games every single day. I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on Ill because it looks cool and terrifying. So I will see you folks next time.
Want to boost your game collection and get a great selection of titles every month? Well, now you can with Humble Choice. Every month you get a hand-picked mix of awesome PC games, and this month's lineup is now live. Running through to August the 5th, you can grab Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader, Demon Ex Machina, Death's Door, Cat Quest 3, and much more. Whether you're building your backlog or discovering something new, now is the perfect time to pick up these fan favourites. And don't forget that every purchase helps a good cause, with this month's Humble Choice membership supporting Covenant House. Get a curated mix of PC games every month, all for just £8.99 a month. Skip a month or cancel any time, and know that 5% of your membership goes to charity. So if you love discovering great games and doing a little good while you're at it, check out Humble Choice today.